This 1-hour webinar provides an overview of the SB1383 Implementation Record requirements. At the end, a new tool to simplify data collection and reporting will be demonstrated.
With us today is Judy Gregory. Judy is the owner of Go to Zero Strategies and has worked in the recycling and solid waste management field for over 30 years. Her firm, Go to Zero, specializes in providing technical assistance, outreach, and training for communities, businesses, and waste haulers with expertise in solid waste, zero waste, and sustainable resource management. With her today is Kim Braun. Kim has more than 30 years of experience in waste management and environmental sustainability. Upon retirement from municipal services, Kim started Braun Consulting Services, LLC, to assist jurisdictions with waste management programs, rate studies, completing mandatory compliance reports, grant writing, bid specifications, procurement, and budget preparation. And finally, we have with us Bob Hollis. Bob is the co-founder and CEO of Mobius Intelligent Systems, a California-based firm focused on implementing technology-based solutions to address global environmental and humanitarian challenges. Bob has served on numerous nonprofit and corporate boards of directors and as an elected public official in El Dorado County, California. His clients include public agencies, municipalities, nonprofit organizations, and triple bottom line companies. Now I'll hand it over to Judy Gregory, who's going to start us off. Thanks, Judy.
Great. Thanks, Jill. Okay, so today's webinar is primarily focused on a jurisdiction's record-keeping requirements under Senate Bill SB 1383. So as we know, SB 1383 is a beast. It has many, many requirements. But today's focus is going to discuss which aspects of the legislation have record-keeping requirements, what those requirements are, and how best to manage and track these records. So these past years, I know that most all of our time and energy has been focused on implementing programs. And the implementation record has probably been kind of low on our list of priorities. But as many of you may have heard, CalRecycle has recently begun making formal requests for the IRs from jurisdictions. And I can speak from experience in helping several cities that this is not an easy process. So if you haven't already started preparing your IR, then you might want to think about doing that very soon. So in a few minutes, Kim's going to actually be providing more of an overview of each specific section of the implementation record. But first, what I want to do is just to share some basic information on what the IR is. I think there's sometimes some confusion. So the IR is a comprehensive record-keeping system of your SB 1383 implementation. So the regs are broken down into articles, and each article of the SB 1383 regulations has a section showing what record-keeping data is required under the regs. So, if you're reviewing these 100 pages of regs, you'll find several sections within the regs that all identify implementation record-keeping requirements. So for instance, as an example, if you look at Article 10, which is the Edible Food Programs article, within that article, there is section 18991.2, which is titled Record-Keeping Requirements for a Jurisdiction's Edible Food Recovery Program. So that's where you find the specific record-keeping requirements within each of the articles. What you don't want to look at is Article 13 titled Reporting. That is not part of the implementation record. That's actually related to your electronic annual report, which CalRecycle, they revamped that last year. And that's the reporting requirements, which are different from the record-keeping requirements. So really important, reporting and record-keeping is very different. So now I'm going to provide you just some tips on how to compile the IR. Very, very basic. There's a lot of information here, but when CalRecycle requests this information, it needs to be packaged in such a way that CalRecycle can review all of the information in either a paper or electronic format. So physical paper or electronic format. So paper means all the documents would have to be in paper. You would keep printed pieces, probably duplicate, because you're going to need to provide one to CalRecycle. When they request it, you would send that or mail that off to them. The second way, an electronic file should be contained specifically within, or preferably, I should say, within one storage location. I can't say that CalRecycle won't accept an email with 100 or 500 or 5,000 files. They may not. So you want to think about a way to basically have a system where it's in one storage location that's organized, and that when CalRecycle goes to review it, they know what they're looking at and how to find the files they're looking for. So this is where you could utilize something as a shared drive or an electronic storage system, such as the one Bob's going to be sharing more about, the SMART system, towards the end of this presentation. Another thing to keep in mind is that the IR, I think I'm ahead of myself in bullets, but the IR is due within 10 days of formal request by CalRecycle. They have started making these requests, and what we've seen so far is that they'll send a letter to the jurisdiction, letting the jurisdiction know that within 10 days of the formal request, the IR will be due, and that the jurisdiction should prepare for that request. Typically about a week later, the formal request has been coming. Several cities have already gotten these requests, so it's coming. When that request comes, you have 10 days to actually send physical copy or provide electronic copy of the IR to CalRecycle. If you haven't started doing this, it's time to get started. So unlike your annual report as well, the IR is not a one-time thing. So this is not something that you prepare once a year. It's a living document. It should be updated so that all records are current within 60 days. This means that every time you do a waste sort, or you distribute outreach material, or you purchase recycled content paper, that those records need to be uploaded to the IR within 60 days of the action, the purchase, the distribution of those materials. Also, unlike the EIR, which covers a one-year period, a reporting period, the IR records shall be maintained for the most recent 5 years. So starting January 1st, 2022 through 5 years before you can start to purge those records. And then the last thing that I think is really important to point out is that these records are subject to the Public Records Act, which means they likely will become accessible to the public. So one thing that I like to suggest to my clients is that you only include what needs to be included in these records, not all the documentation, not all the comments from your site visits and such, but just the records that CalRecycle needs to see, knowing that they will be subject potentially to public records requests and could be made public. Okay, next slide. And then I love to show, this is a video of CalRecycle's Excel template, which is available for download. I personally don't think it's possible to maintain an IR in an Excel spreadsheet, unless you're maybe a very small city, but there's just going to, over 5 years, be way too many records to do this. But here's a few tips for success that will hopefully help you. So first tip, I really recommend not going the paper route unless you have a lot of extra storage space and really like filing items into storage. It's going to be a lot of extra time and probably not very efficient to do that. It is possible, but we're talking about lots and lots of records. So consider an electronic storage system for your needs. Second, know what you're tracking and know what is required of the IR. So really spend some time diving into the regs or working with somebody on your team or a consultant that knows the regs inside and out and is very familiar with what's required to be provided. In some cases, they don't provide line by line detail of what should be included, but it's super important that you're providing the information that's needed without a lot of excess information. It'll save you time and it'll leave less exposure for CalRecycle or whoever's inspecting them or looking at these records to see a lot of excess information that you probably don't want shared. Next, so this is where your village comes in. I say it takes a village to put together an IR. you really need to start identifying which staff will be providing IR documentation and set up a schedule for when records will be recorded. So remember, SB 1383 isn't just about trash and recycling anymore. You're likely going to be working with your purchasing department, your parks department, building and permits for the construction, enforcement, your hauler, probably one or more consultants. So you need to know who your team is, have a point person who will be responsible to either compile all of these records or review what has been compiled by them. And finally, look into purchasing or subscribing to an electronic system such as the smart system, which I've noted, or any of the other systems that are out there. And I did want to share that CalRecycle is getting ready to release its next round of grant funding for the jurisdictions. And purchasing an electronic system is an allowable expense. So it's a great opportunity for you to get prepared and research out these different systems that are available and have one lined up, so that you can include that in your grant funding request. Let me see. Going to the next slide. And then just before I pass it off to Kim, I just want to share that there are some of us who a little bit crazy. We've spent a lot of time getting very familiar with the regs. So I just want to recommend that you lean into the resources and professionals that are available to help you. You don't have to do this alone. It's a lot of work. My personal experience is that the IR is probably one of the most challenging components of SB 1383 that I've worked on so far. So my firm does offer a complimentary SB 1383 checkup. And at the end of the checkup, we provide a gaps assessment for you. And then this is just one page of the gap assessment. But the great thing about it is it's really like an organization tool for your IR. And if you just follow this 7-page document, it really identifies all the documents you need to maintain in the IR. So with that, Jill, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and you can go ahead and launch the next polls. And then after that, we'll pass it on to Kim. Had I been sharing my screen, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you have been.
Okay, because now it's not letting me stop share. So I don't know.
Jill should be able to take it over as the
Yeah.
host.
There we go. Oh, that's the old poll. There we go.
I know. I super apologize. It's just keeps taking me to the old poll, not the new one.
Okay.
Wait, here we go. Sorry.
Oh.
Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it.
Great.
So basically, we're just in terms of our Q&A, it'd be great to get some background on if you're the person that's responsible for overseeing the implementation record and what type of systems you're using. So you should be seeing 3 questions on your screen. Just give everybody a minute.
Great. And we did have one question come in, Judy, from Katie. She's asking, is there an easy to digest list of required records we're required to maintain related to SB 1383?
Why, yes, there is. So I might have already answered that question on the last slide. So we've created this, it's like a 7-page document that outlines all of the record keeping requirements of from the regs. And if you're interested in signing up for a demo, it takes about, not a demo, a checkup. We basically go through your SB 1383 readiness and provide this to you at the end of the checkup. And what it is it basically serves as almost like an index for your implementation record keeping.
Great, thank you.
Great. So can you take over the screen because I'm not able to stop sharing?
Yes, it should be showing my screen now. Is that not correct?
No.
Let me see.
It won't let you stop sharing because it should have mine up behind it.
It might, well, you know what? I'm in the webinar. Do you guys still see my screen?
Yes.
Interesting. Technical difficulties in the middle of, there we go. Okay, now it's something starting to happen, Jill. Yay. All right, I'm gonna mute and stop my video. Take it away, Kim. You're up.
Okay, we have to start from the beginning, Jill. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad you had an opportunity to join us today. I'm going to go through in more detail what the requirements are that you would need to keep as part of this SB 1383 regulation. But before we start that, as Judy had mentioned in one of her slides earlier, it's not just your little department of environmental management or solid waste management. It is really your entire city that will be playing a role in this. And part of that would be, number one, your city council. Two, your city manager. You need administrative support in order to do this. Three, there's some requirements in which your finance department is going to need to be involved. Your planning department, building division, code enforcement, of course, public works, definitely your information technology department, believe it or not, parks and recreation, and your transportation department. So we'll discuss a little bit about how they all play a role in SB 1383 as we move forward in this presentation. So next slide, Jill. Great. So first thing, as Judy had indicated earlier, you can have a choice. You can keep your files, physical files, paper files in a location looking like the picture I have on my slide and trying to figure out what you're going to present to CalRecycle when they ask for the information. Or you could put it electronically to make it a lot easier for you and for CalRecycle to be able to research and review what your city has completed so far. But I want everyone to understand you need a few things that should have been done by now. But if not, I'm hoping that you start getting it moving along. One, has your municipality adopted an ordinance relevant to SB 1383? Council approved and adopted that. Number two, which most cities probably have in their municipal code, in their building code, and that would be a green building ordinance requiring certain things with construction and demolition debris and how that's processed and what percentage of that is reused or recycled. Another ordinance, which was enacted several years ago, is the Water Efficiency Landscape Ordinance. And most municipalities should already have that ordinance put somewhere in one of their codes, probably again in your building code, but it's something that you need to have in a file so that CalRecycle knows you do have an existing ordinance. Also kept in your files should be a franchise hauler agreement or contract or some authoritative document advising that you do have this agreement with the hauler. If you do not have a franchise hauler and you have an open market, you should also have in your records the policies of how you're monitoring these haulers throughout your city. And you also need to have an environmental purchasing policy put together. This is not an ordinance. It'll be an administrative instruction, could be signed by your city manager or whose city manager delegates to have the authority to implement the purchasing policy. Next slide, please. Great. So one of the requirements of SB 1383 is that you have an inspection and enforcement program put together. So I'm not going to go through every one of these bullets, but when you do an inspection program, you should be looking for compliance. If your organic waste generator requirements are listed, do you have any requirements put together for self-haulers? And is there a policy or does this include self-hauler in your SB 1383 ordinance? Do you have something put together as far as education for edible food donors? Do you have the list of donors? And do you know whether or not these edible food donors already have written agreements with edible food organizations to receive the donated food. That is really something that's very important. You really need to have this written agreement put together between the donor and the organizations. You have your education outreach for any violators of SB 1383. If you put together complaint investigations, do you have how you're going to track them? Your notice of violations, when were they issued, and if you imposed any penalties. So there's a lot more to look at, and we're going to go further, and I can get into more detail as we move along to the next slide. So organic waste services, one of the things you have to describe would be what type of system your city has. Do you have a 3-container, a 2-container, or a 1-container system? You have to provide what type of materials are accepted in each container. You really need C and green to have a geographic map of the entire area's service. So that's really a map of your city or county. And if you're in a county or unincorporated regions that are being serviced and under the direction of the county. You have to list any and all high diversion organic waste facilities that you may be using. You have to make a list of all the haulers that you've approved to take organic waste to these facilities. You need a map of all the routes where these organics were collected if they're taken to high diversion organics facilities. And then another thing that may be overlooked if you haven't really read the fine print in the regulation is compostable plastics. The facility that you're taking your organics to, do they accept compostable plastics? And if they do, you're going to need a written notification from that facility that yes, they do accept compostable plastics. That has to be kept in a file. If your city allows your residents or businesses to put their organics in plastic bags, and then your processing facility accepts it that way, you're also going to need the facility to certify that these bags are removed at the facility prior to processing. So these are some of the things that you have to have an organics program, and okay, I can list my hauler and I can list where it goes, but you also need to make sure you have these certifications in file if necessary. Next file, Jill, thank you. Contamination. So CalRecycle wants to know what you're doing to try to minimize contamination so that recycles aren't going into the trash and organics aren't in the trash can. One of the ways to do that is through waste evaluations or route reviews. You'll need to list if you're doing that or not. If you do a waste evaluation at a facility, where was that conducted? You need copies of all notices to generators that have contaminated containers. That's both commercial and residential. And then this is something I highlighted. You have to list the number of containers having contaminants found through a route review, visual inspection, and where the contaminants were found in the sample and where was it disposed. So generally, if you're a single family resident and your automated truck goes by and you already did the lid flip and you found contaminants and you tagged the container, you need to keep a record of that address, or at least what route if you're finding a lot. And then your truck will go by and probably take it to the processing facility, whether it's recycling, organics, or the landfill. And you would have to note that although we found contaminants, it still went to our recyclable processing facility, in which they'll pull out the residuals and send to the landfill. So that's the most important thing you have to worry about, that probably a lot of cities have not documented yet. So also any copies of enforcement actions that you've taken if you find contaminants more often than not at one location, and how you can help that resident or business finally become compliant. Next slide, please. So here's your lid flips, your route reviews. You have to keep a record of all your inspections. So the name or account name of the person, the dates you inspected. It could be route 1 if it's single family. It should list individuals if it's commercial, what you found. Did you give any notices of violation? What educational materials did you distribute as a result of the inspection? If you can get photographs, that would be wonderful to keep in each individual account that's been found to be contaminated with improper materials. Okay, that's the requirement. So really, if you got photographs, you're in good shape. Next slide, please. And waste evaluations are a little different. And if you look through the regulations, there's specifics based upon the number of generators on a route. If there's 1,400 or 1,500 or less, then there's a certain minimum amount of samples that need to be taken. There's a certain weight per your demographic size per route. Then you have to determine how much contamination in pounds that you found during this waste evaluation. And then you would notify all the generators on the route that, we're this much contaminated to make sure that the next time you do another waste evaluation, that you can see an improvement, less contamination per se. And if you're doing waste evaluations, please remember in the regulations, they say they're seasonal. So that would be a minimum of twice a year, probably once summer, once winter. Next slide, please. Waivers and exemptions. So de minimis, a waiver can be issued by the city if a generator generates the minimal amount of organics that's not required by SB 1383. Another one the city can authorize is a physical space waiver. That means there's just no room possible, maybe in your small alleys or even in the enclosures, whatever that's assigned to a commercial business, that an organic or multifamily with 5 or more units, that an organics container just cannot be added onto this business's account. Rarely do you see a frequency of service waiver. However, the city does have the authority to be able to issue exemptions and waivers as a result of that. So one of the things I want to point out here, you can see all the bullets, and these are all the requirements that you need to keep in your implementation reporting. And the one I like to highlight that a lot of municipalities may not have captured when reviewing the regulation is that you have to record the amount of solid waste removed from your homeless encampment. So hopefully, if you're in charge of this report, you're going to find out if the hauler's doing that, or if code enforcement has a special contractor that does this type of waste removal. And also all of the tonnages from illegal dumping that's been collected. So I don't know whether that's part of your franchise hauler contract, or if there's a specific hauler that just provides illegal dumping removals. That's something that has to be reported if in fact it's over 100 tons. Okay, next slide, please. And then all of your education and outreach should be maintained somewhere. That includes all of the brochures and flyers that you've distributed as a result of the requirements of SB 1383. I would also try to maintain somewhere in a file any social media posts that were sent out as a result of SB 1383. Anything in billing inserts, any mailing, anything that's in a brochure form that you've created that you've left at different city facilities. I know when I was working for Culver City and Santa Monica, we used to leave information at our senior center, at our teen center, at our parks and recreation offices for the general public. We would send things out through the Chamber of Commerce in their newsletters. We'd leave information at City Hall. So there's various ways that you can distribute information and keep it in a file. Next slide, please. Oh, you can push it twice because I got a cute little truck. There we go. So in addition to what you're required, your jurisdiction has to have a hauler program. And what you're going to need for this is, how are you monitoring your franchised hauler, your self-haulers, or those, if you have an open market city, which means any hauler can come in and pick up recycling, trash, and organics per customer, especially for the commercial sector, which a lot of municipalities still do at this time. So if that's the case, how are you approving haulers to work in your city? And how do you issue, deny, or revoke approvals to haul within your jurisdiction? What are the requirements for your self-haulers? When a business says, yeah, we're back hauling back. A good example of this I found is a company called Sleep Number, or they also, like at their stores, do a lot of backhauling to a central corporate location. So do you know that information? And if you don't, you should start acquiring it so that you can keep that in your record. And then how are you going to demonstrate to CalRecycle that your hauler is in compliance with the ordinances that you've created? So these are really important. This is really important for municipalities, especially if you have an open market. You're going to have to try to figure out how to maintain those documents in a file. Next slide, please. And now edible food recovery. For those of you, I'm not going to get into tier 1 and tier 2 and all of the factors that make each generator a tier 1 or tier 2. But what I would really like you to remember is, what are you going to be doing or doing now to monitor edible food generator compliance? Because in the SB 1383, they really don't have to report to the city. They have to report information to CalRecycle. How are you going to make sure that that's happening? So I want everyone to understand that if I was managing this program for my municipality, I would put a requirement that these edible food generators send reports to the city as well. And you may be able to do that when you issue the annual business license. If they haven't complied with sending a report, then you hold the business license until you can get that information. That always seemed to be a big help for me. But this is one of the things you really need to do. The other thing is really thinking about if you need to increase or not your edible food recovery capacity. Now, I know the date for doing that has changed a little bit to give you more time, but as you're starting to compile a record of who your edible food generators are and who your organizations are that are receiving the food, you can start planning for your capacity. Next slide, please. Okay. Another one that's a little harder for everyone, especially if you're not in the financial world of your municipality, is procurement. The organic waste that you're collecting on the routes and is sent to your processing facility, you're required to procure a certain amount of that material annually. And they have a formula out there. It's 0.08, that's the number, times your total population. So hypothetically, let's say the 0.08 and your municipal population is 100,000 residents. That would be 8,000 tons annually that you're going to have to procure. Now, I'm not saying you have to do all of this just in compost or mulch. There's other conversions that you can use in addition to or solely in order to meet that requirement. So next slide, please. Okay, CalRecycle is going to request that you tell them which type of process you're using to meet your procurement target. So for 8,000 tons, you could do that by compost, getting it back into your community, where you're going to use that compost, maybe your parks, maybe your public right-of-way, maybe in your medians. You could also do mulch. I'll get down to that in a little bit. But you can also derive fuel or electricity from some of the biomass conversion facilities or from your public wastewater treatment facilities. But you have to put in detail how you're using it. Are you fueling refuse trucks? Are you fueling your maintenance trucks? How about your buses? If you have a municipally owned bus company, electricity can be generated, and what are you powering up with that electricity that's generated from the probably aerobic digestion process. You got to keep copies of all of your invoices and purchase orders. So when you're buying that fuel, who's buying that fuel and where is that information logged? Is that in your fleet maintenance division? Is that go back to your purchasing division to pay the company you're purchasing the fuel from? These are information you really need to keep, and you're going to have to work closely with your purchasing division and some of the other facilities that are using the materials generated from your organic waste. Okay, so one other thing, if you're going to go to a publicly owned treatment facility, which is like, if you're familiar with Los Angeles County, there's Hyperion, that's a publicly owned treatment facility. That facility has to provide a written certification that they follow all the regulatory procedures for the conversion of this material. And there's a ton of regulatory procedures you don't need to worry about as long as you have an authorized person to provide that written certification to you. You need just that to keep it in file. The same thing goes with procuring electricity, and they have to certify that your materials coming from a solid waste facility and then sent to them. And then mulch is a little more difficult. And I just learned that mulch is not procured by tons. CalRecycle will only accept mulch procurement by cubic yards now. And there's a lot of application standards for mulch requirements. So if you look up SB1383 and under mulch, it'll give you the other California legislation for the use of mulch. Next slide, please. Paper procurement, every city should have some type of paper procurement requirement at this point in time. I know we've been doing that since probably the late 90s, and so much content of your paper should be recycled material. So, and that's not just copy paper and writing paper, it's also your toilet paper and your paper towels and your packaging paper and paper used for brochures. So you really need to work with finance to determine how much paper is purchased annually, and that you need some type of information either from that vendor you're purchasing from or the manufacturer that shows that the paper was made out of so much recycled content. Next slide, please. Inspection and enforcement, as we said before, you should keep copies for tier 1 generators and food recovery organizations. This should have begun in January 2022. You have about 6 months left before tier 2 starts coming into play. Make sure you have some information on the inspections, any enforcement actions taken, including issuing notices of violation, any civil penalties issued, dates that you expect an entity to become compliant, all educational materials that you distributed to this food generator or food organization, food recovery organization. And then your notice of violation should be really, really detailed. The name of the person that received it or the entity, why they're getting the violation, the date, and when the city expects the entity to become compliant. It could be 60 days, 90 days, what you put down there. And then what is the penalty for not complying by that date? Next slide, please. Okay, so basically, we're not going to get into too much of this, just that any route reviews you do has to include the description of the location and addresses where you found contaminants in containers. Next slide, please. Compliance reviews are all of the above from the last slide. And then you need to also include the date when the jurisdiction determined that the entity did become compliant, okay? And how you made that determination. Like last time we went, they resolved the fact that they had no organics can, so they have one now. Something, you have to list exactly what it was that they violated and that they weren't doing, and now they are. Okay, next slide, please. And then your complaint investigations, okay? This one is a tricky one. I know some municipalities have a complaint form on their main webpage, and that complaint could be about anything. Oh, there's a big pothole in my street light won't go out at night and I can't sleep, it's blinking and it's crazy, or I saw, they just have a ton of different things you can complain about and send it off. And whoever's in charge of that initial complaint form will then distribute that to the department that would be responsible for resolving it. So that's one way that you can initiate a complaint about SB 1383. Complaints can be anonymous, so people don't have to put their name. They just have to be quite detailed with what's an entity or resident is not doing regarding SB 1383. If it's not anonymous, you'll have a name and contact information. You'll have the identity of the alleged violator, what the violation may be, the location, relevant facts that are known by the complainant, if there's any photographs or documents supporting the allegations, are there any witnesses? Investigations must start within 90 days of the receipt of the complaint. However, the jurisdiction can get a complaint and determine if the allegations are true or if they're totally unwarranted, So that's something a jurisdiction can set parameters on to see how you're really going to go investigate complaints. All your complaints, whether anonymous or not, must be kept in a record. And you also have to keep in your record your responses back to the initial complainee if you know that person's name and address and what you did to resolve the situation. So I think that's it, but next slide, please. Yes, so remember, here we are. The most important thing is one central location for easy accessibility to all of the records that you need to keep as required by SB 1383. So which way do you think is easier? The picture on the left, where you can have a closet filled up with nothing but shelves and identify that closet as your SB 1383 file closet. Or you can keep it into a nicely compiled electronic system. And all you'd have to do is click on your SB 1383 icon and the information that you need will be readily available. So with that being said, I'm going to turn this presentation now over to Bob Hollis, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about how to compile this information into an electronic format. So I thank you very much, and I'm around to answer your questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. That was fantastic. And I can see why people would be concerned about all of the information and records that they need to keep track of. But that's what we're here to try to make easier for everybody. So again, thank you all for joining us today. And I'm going to be covering just 4 of the implementation records, and Kim touched on some of them. And it can seem daunting, but like anything else, if you break it down into simple steps and you have the right tools for it, it can be made very easy. So just as a brief overview, the implementation records that I'll be showing you are part of our comprehensive Smart 1383 system, which covers everything from a generator management database, field maps for route reviews, results, analytics, waste evaluations, all the records, waiver administration, and of course there's tech support. And just to give you an idea of what the generator manager is, because I'll be referring to that, every generator is kept in the database, and all of the records related to those generators are kept in the database to make it simple and easy to manage. And this is just a demo dummy data set. So these aren't real businesses, but to give you an idea of all the different things we cover, that's what they are. Implementation records themselves, someone earlier asked about a list. These are all of the implementation records. And again, we'll just be covering a few of those today. And here's an example of the complaint investigations. So we'll be going through complaint investigations, contamination minimization, recycled paper procurement, and then written program descriptions. And of course, everything that we designed has ADA accessibility features. So all of our platforms, you have accessibility tools. And then we go through what's called a VPAT analysis for everything that we do to make sure that we're meeting the highest standards possible. And we also want to make it as simple as possible. So as an example there, for our complaint investigations, you can add via the generator manager. And this is just a link back to what I already showed you, so I'm not going to click that. But if you were to add a record, it starts here. And some people already have records that they're keeping one way or another. So you can either upload a sheet or document containing a complaint investigation record, such as this, where you can put in the description and then browse to your sheet and just upload that into the system. Or if you don't already have that, you can use our standalone form, which covers everything required. So you can see here, for an example, there's a complaint number. Is the complaint anonymous or not? The date the complaint was received. Here you have the name, email, and phone of the complainant, address, and then the alleged violator organization name, if known, and the address and location of the violation, and then any description. If you've got photos, you can upload them here. You can put content in related to witnesses or witness statements. And all of this information is, of course, driven by everything required by CalRecycle. So working with experts like Judy, we went through every single thing requested and then tried to break it down and make it very easy so that you can just walk through this, complete the form. You'll know you're covering everything you need to cover. And then that goes into a comprehensive database. So has the jurisdiction declined to investigate, investigation start date, compliance determination, whether or not a notice was issued or is pending, and then whether or not penalties were imposed, and whether or not the complainant was notified of results. Just as Kim said, we need to keep records of all of that. So that can all be added here, and then you submit the record, and then down below, those records would show immediately. So this is, again, just a demo. So these aren't actual real records, but one of the things we do provide are samples. So for every single document that you're supposed to provide or make available, we have a template that you can use as a starting point to make things simple. Now, you might see things in the different tables that I showed today are a little bit inconsistent, and that's because this is a demo and people have wanted to see it different ways. So you can see here, if I were to click this, this would actually download that document. So that makes it easy to do. And there are more fields than you will see here, but that would be too many to fit on a screen. So you can click this option and look at details, and that will show every single component of the form and every piece of information that needs to be included. So you can look at it in a horizontal or a vertical page and see all of the details and then edit any of those details as well. Or you can click here to edit the entry completely. And then you can see here, if I enable inline edit, you can see that if I were to click here, it'll let me edit that right here. So I can change anything in the form right here in line to make it simple and easy to use. And I'm using a very small screen right now. That's why it's not showing the whole calendar. But we want to make it as easy as possible. Are already a lot of records and a lot of things to keep track of. So the more we can provide to make it simple and easy and automated or programmatically functioning, the better it is. So I can disable inline edit again and click here if I want to. And this would keep track of all the records. Now, for those of you, and I think there's some online that are already using our generator manager, if you're using that, all of this is done automatically. So if you're keeping track of everything through the GM, you don't need to bother about entering all of this because it'll already be there. And we also can create unlimited custom user roles and custom access levels. So for example, if you have a consultant or anyone else that's just working doing a specific part of this, someone asked about haulers earlier. If you have a hauler that's supposed to be entering different pieces of information, we can provide that hauler with nothing but what they're allowed to see. And they could enter a record, but before that record would show anywhere, you can have an administrator that would approve it. And if you want to take a look at that and have somebody that goes through and reviews and then says, okay, approve, that can all be done before it goes into the report. Or perhaps your hauler is the administrator for their specific section, but they can't get to anything else they're not supposed to see or access. And that's the same with CalRecycle. So CalRecycle can have a login to enter the system. And when they log in, all they're going to see is one page that says cow recycle required reports. And the only thing included in those reports are going to be just precisely what is asked for. So they don't have complete access to the generators and the database and all of the things that go on behind the scenes, but they have immediate access to anything that you would like them to have access to. So that's how complaint investigations work. And then we could go over to contamination. So again, anybody using the generator manager can instantly access these records. And I included some brief examples. Again, this is just a demo portal, so it's not all flushed out and looking as nice and smooth as our regular client accounts are. But you can see here, again, you can add through the generator manager. Or if you want to see what route reviews look like, these are just examples of route reviews. And again, you can open these up and see every single detail of all the different pieces of data that are collected. But you might not need to do that. Also, when Cow Recycle comes in, they can download an Excel sheet, a CFV file, but Cow Recycle's version shows just what's required to be shown in the report. So that's an example of route review data. Here's waste evaluation data. And again, these are tied right to the generator manager in real time. So we have 64 entries here that are just dummy entries. But if you had people out doing field audits or waste evaluations, as they enter that information into the generator manager through one of our mobile apps or from a computer screen, depending on where they're doing their work, that would instantly update this sheet. So you don't have to go in and do things more than once. We like it so that if you enter a piece of data in one place, one time, then it populates throughout the system wherever it needs to populate. Here's an example of where you can upload records. So if you were using a standalone system and didn't have the advantage of the full GM, you could use a form like this to upload your record, put in the day, period covered, number of contaminated containers, as Kim mentioned is required, the type, route review or waste evaluation, and you could upload all of your results files or folders, your photos, contamination notices. And then if you have your own folder system, let's say some people might be using a Google Drive or something like that and putting everything into their own system, but they want to provide access to that for Cow Recycle without having to reproduce or upload, then we can just put a link directly to that folder that's shared that has only what you want to share in it. So again, you can do the same thing with enforcement documentation, either upload files or put a link to your file or folder, and then you just submit that record. And once you do, that would show up down here. So this would be what a customer access page would look like. So you would be able to see all of this as a customer of Smart 1383. So you can see your entire table. You can copy it, create a CSV file, download it as an Excel sheet for making it easy to look at and review, create a PDF print, and you can decide which columns you want to show. So suppose, for example, we have a report that covers too many columns to show and you only need to see a few. You can click here and decide which you would like to show in your table while you're looking at it. And then here's your recycled paper procurement. So very similar, you can add a record or view records. Here's a description, date, your invoice or receipt number, the product type, quantity, unit of measure, proof of purchase file to upload, vendor certification and verification is applicable, and any notes you might want to include, and add a record. And again, you can see here an example of a record, and right now we have inline editing enabled. So if I needed to go back and put in a link here or change the vendor cart information or the measure, any of these, I can do it right here in line to keep it simple. Or I can disable inline editing and use this option if I want to see every field available, and also click that option to know that if I click a document link, for example, that I can download that immediately. Another really cool feature, and Judy deserves most of the credit for this because she's put so much work into these written program descriptions and applied all of her expertise to make this as simple and easy as possible for everybody using Smart 1383. You can add a record directly, or of course, go down to view your records. And adding records very simple. You can pick, what you want, which record it is. So these are the different required written program descriptions, going from compliance reviews, hauler programs, food recovery, everything that is available and everything that could be needed is all right here. And Judy's team has worked hard to put together templates. So anybody who's onboarding with Smart 1383 will have all of that work already done for them, which saves probably hundreds of hours of time. So you choose which type of program, the file title, file description, any notes that you might want to include, effective date, and then you can upload your file here. And we can also customize for any different type of file type. So if you're using something that's not included, we can include it. And then your records would show down here. So here are examples of a template description. So for written descriptions of a complaint investigation, written description for contamination minimization. So this tells you what your policy or what your procedure is for doing that. And because inline editing is not enabled, I could click here and it would let me download that immediately. And so, whoops, I don't really need to do that. Sorry about that. And then, so that's what you could do there, or you can edit or delete an entry, enable inline editing, and come in and change, what type it is if you accidentally entered the wrong information, and do all that right in line. And so I know I covered a lot in about 12 minutes here, but we're running close on time. And the key thing to know is that Judy or Kim or I, we're all available. And I would suggest Judy probably as the point of contact if you'd like to go in any further. And I believe we'll be doing future webinars where we go deeper into a lot of these other implementation records. So thank you again for your time and attention. I hope this gives you some more insights and some direction. And with that, I will pass it back to Jill.
Hey, Bob, really quick, I'm going to share the closing screen as well with our contact information if you stop sharing. Thanks.
Great. Wow. Well, thank you, everyone. Certainly quite a bit of information on the SB 1383 record keeping requirements. Bob, we did have a question related to the how to get information on the pricing for the Smart 1383 system.
Sure. I would suggest contacting Judy for that. She's been a partner in the development of this platform, and her expertise has been invaluable. I provide the technical aspects along with a couple of other people who are some of the most brilliant coders I know. But Judy would be happy to talk about that or get in touch. And it's very much depends on which components people are interested in. So she would be happy to set up a one-on-one and talk to you about whether you want the full generator manager, which really does make everything much simpler and covers way more than just the implementation records, or just the standalone component of the implementation records. But one thing I can say is based on what we've seen in the market, that we're a much better value than what we've seen out there from other options and more comprehensive. But she could get back to you on that.
Jill, can I just add one thing really quick? Is that, so thank you for the trying to give me credit, but Kim was the one who developed all of our written program descriptions, and she spent a lot of time. And those templates, which basically have placeholders for the cities or the jurisdictions to fill in their city specific content, are already developed, and they come with the IR tool. So you'll have all of those 15 or so written program descriptions in a template form available for download with that. So I just wanted to add that in. Go ahead, Jill.
Great. Another question from Michael. You mentioned that there is a mobile app. So he's asking if what functionality is there, but given our limited time, maybe you can just speak briefly about the mobile app and then schedule a follow-up time to get into details with him.
You're muted.
Sure. No, I'm happy to answer that question. Our mobile app does everything. Is this Michael Hulls by chance?
No, Michael Simonitis.
Oh, okay. Hi, Michael Simonitis. I know that Michael as well. So Michael, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm sure you already have my email and phone number from times we've communicated in the past. But our mobile app allows you to do anything from route reviews to waste evaluations and anything else that might be needed to be done in the field. It'll work with any type of device. I wouldn't recommend using something as small as a phone, but we've had success using tablets and Surface platforms It's platform agnostic, so it'll work with Apple, it'll work with Android, it'll work with Microsoft platforms, you name it, and it'll work. And it'll even allows you to collect records in places that have, bad Wi-Fi, where you're not really directly connected to the system itself because you can't get a good connection. But it'll store all the data locally, and then as soon as you have a connection again, it'll put it all straight into the database so that it updates your generator manager or implementation records, depending on what you're working on.
Great, fantastic. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. You have our contact information if you'd like more information or to schedule the complimentary SB1383 checkup. And with that, we wish everybody a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.